The Cruel Billionaire. Finally heard the one answer he never wanted. In a world where power, passion, and pride collide, there is one question that no man, no matter how wealthy or influential, ever wants to hear answered in the negative. Alexander Hawthorne. A billionaire, renowned for his unyielding tyranny, believed he could bend every soul to his will. For years he wielded his influence like a sword, cutting down rivals and molding destinies to suit his own agenda. Yet beneath his fortress of steel and glass, a hidden truth stirred. When the woman he was certain he had conquered stepped forward with a single word that defied his empire, Alexander's entire world cracked. Alexander Hawthorne stood at the apex of a glimmering penthouse in New York City, surveying his kingdom through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, with jet-black hair combed back, revealing a sharp, commanding forehead. His tailored Italian suit, hand-stitched by Domenico Caraceni, reflected his refined taste and stratospheric net worth. Hawthorne Industries sprawled across global markets, from technology to real estate, and even philanthropic fronts that he used mostly to garner good press. The world knew him as the man who could intimidate presidents, negotiate with prime ministers, and casually trade witty banter with fellow billionaire Elon Musk at high-profile galas. Yet behind his imposing figure and well-crafted public persona, Alexander carried within him a deep-seated insecurity. Even as a child, Alexander had harbored the intense need to control every aspect of his environment. Growing up in a dilapidated Brooklyn apartment with a single mother who struggled to pay the bills, young Alexander had watched his mother, Meredith Hawthorne, labor night and day. He vowed then he would never be powerless again, where others saw poverty and despair. Alexander saw a future empire forged by sheer will. Hard years at Harvard Business School had honed his ambition. The moment he landed his first major contract, an outlandish real estate deal financed through questionable channels, Alexander understood there was no turning back. Achieving absolute control over everything and everyone in his orbit became not just a drive, but an obsession. No one refused him anything. Not board members, not employees, not lovers. The tabloids called him the inevitable billionaire. And for a time that title was accurate. The day began like any other for Alexander. He drank his custom-pressed green juice-red reports from his personal economist and ignored the quiet pleas of his personal assistant, Evelyn Carter, who tried and failed to remind him of obligations that didn't interest him. Alexander's mind, however, was already wandering to something far more enthralling. In a glass case on the far side of his office was an antique cameo brooch rumored to have once belonged to Empress Josephine. It wasn't the brooch itself that fascinated him, but the idea that he possessed something rumored to be cursed, an omen of heartbreak. It was ironic how the wealthy often entertained superstition, but for Alexander it was a metaphor. Heartbreak was a concept for those who were weak. He hadn't given or asked for real affection since his college days, and the few who claimed to love him were either dazzled by his wealth or fearful of his wrath. He recognized it, accepted it, even relished in it. Nothing and no one, he convinced himself, was out of his reach, or so he thought. A ball was being held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art that evening, co-sponsored by Bill Gates Foundation and Hawthorne Industries to raise money for environmental initiatives. Alexander, despite his disinterest in ecological activism, wore a mask of benevolence. High society events were a stage for him, an arena in which he could observe the rest of the world, fawn over his presence, while gleaning future opportunities to expand his empire. The great hall of the Met was adorned with shimmering chandeliers, elegant centerpieces of white orchids, and a swirl of couture gowns in every direction. Soft classical music spilled from the string quartet near the entrance. Photographers from Vogue and the New York Times stood ready to capture each arrival. The guest list included luminaries such as Bernard Arnault, Oprah Winfrey, and even a rumored appearance by Warren Buffett. Whispers spread like wildfire when Alexander's personal Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up, and the tall, imposing figure emerged, shaking hands with a carefully curated expression of warmth. Hovering not far from Alexander's side, Evelyn Carter stood in a tasteful black gown, tablet in hand, double-checking that every handshake Alexander would initiate would be with a prospective ally. She admired his confidence, but found herself increasingly disturbed by the cruelty she'd seen behind the scenes. As his trusted assistant, she'd witnessed Alexander sabotage smaller companies, orchestrate smear campaigns, and humiliate subordinates. She hoped that somewhere beneath that hardened exterior, a glimmer of humanity remained. Around midnight, when the event was at its peak, the massive marble steps outside the hall came to life once again. A hush fell over the crowd as a woman in a slender red dress glided inside. She had honey-brown hair that fell in soft waves, large dark eyes that sparkled with both curiosity and caution, and a graceful presence that caught the entire room's attention. This was Sophia Moretti, an emerging entrepreneur in the luxury fashion industry, whose brand Moretti Couture had taken Italy by storm. She was rumored to have recently closed an investment deal with the heiress Margaret Hathaway, who was known for her philanthropic leanings. Alexander's gaze locked onto Sophia the moment she entered. He had seen pictures of her at other galas and social events, but never in person. Her presence seemed to exert a gravitational pull on him. With a subtle gesture to Evelyn, he signaled that he intended to introduce himself. His typical approach with new acquaintances was smooth and calculated. Extol the virtues of Hawthorne Industries, feign genuine interest in their own endeavors, and subtly remind them of his power. But something about Sophia's aura disarmed him. Instead of his usual commanding stride, he found himself pausing, adjusting his cufflinks, and waiting for the right moment. Already in the back of his mind, a tiny voice whispered, "She could be the one to challenge you." He shook off the thought. No one challenged Alexander Hawthorne without facing consequences. He moved forward and spoke with a calm, confident timbre. "Ms. Moretti, I've been hoping to meet you. Your designs have taken the fashion world by storm. Let me congratulate you on your success in Europe." Sophia responded with a polite nod and a gentle smile. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. It's an honor to finally make your acquaintance. I've heard a great deal about you and your influence." Her choice of the word influence wasn't quite the praise he might have expected, yet it was neutral enough to be polite. Alexander's brow twitched as he processed the subtle nuance. Indeed, he replied, "Influence is the currency of our world. Wouldn't you say I hope we can find ways to support each other's endeavors?" And with that, the first seeds of a relationship, one that would irrevocably alter both their destinies, were planted. Over the next few weeks, Alexander couldn't seem to shake the memory of Sophia Moretti from his mind. He demanded that Evelyn Carter schedule a dinner meeting with Sophia, using the pretext of exploring a collaboration between Moretti Couture and Hawthorne Luxury Holdings, a division under his vast corporate umbrella. At first, Sophia was hesitant, wary of the man's notorious reputation. Yet the possibility of tapping into Hawthorne's global distribution channels was too tantalizing to dismiss. Their first private dinner transpired in the exclusive lounge of the peninsula New York. The air was scented with jasmine candles. Live harp music softly provided an elegant soundtrack to their encounter. Rather than engage in small talk, Alexander dove directly into proposals for brand expansions, joint fashion events, and leveraged marketing. He painted a future in which Moretti Couture would stand alongside the biggest luxury titans in the world. He spoke of synergy potential and an exciting new era of fashion. Sophia listened intently occasionally, sipping her white wine. She noticed how Alexander's fingers tapped the table to punctuate his key points, an action that showcased both his impatience and the restlessness of a mind that was always scheming. She conceded that he was brilliant in business, but she also detected a darkness behind his polished veneer. Perhaps it was in the way he dismissed certain ethics, or how he gloated about swallowing up smaller brands that refused to cooperate. Before they parted that evening, Alexander extended his hand, expecting a firm handshake of agreement. Sophia offered a polite smile instead. "I'll speak with my team," she said. "I need to ensure this aligns with Moretti Couture's vision." It was a diplomatic deflection. Alexander forced a grin, though the look in his eyes revealed something akin to displeasure at her hesitation. When they stepped outside into the cool night air, a silent tension lingered. Outside the restaurant, paparazzi and fans congregated for a glimpse of any celebrity. Flashbulbs exploded when they spotted the two emerging. Cameras clicked, capturing the image of a stern billionaire escorting the elegant designer to her car. As he watched her get into the black Mercedes, waiting at the curb, Alexander's pulse quickened. She was slipping from his grasp, if only momentarily. He was unaccustomed to people who resisted his immediate demands. Even as she vanished into the night, he promised himself he would have her cooperation one way or another. That evening, while he walked down the silent corridors of his penthouse, polished marble floors reflecting the city lights, he realized he wanted more than just a business deal. He wanted Sophia's respect, her admiration, and if possible, her heart. Yet the thought both intrigued and irritated him. In equal measure, wanting something that wasn't guaranteed was a foreign concept in Alexander's world. Alexander rarely thought about his past. He had suppressed it, burying memories under layers of success and transactions that overshadowed that painful childhood. But the name Moretti struck a distant chord. Late one evening, he summoned his private investigator, Jacob Lockwood, a man known for his discreet yet thorough investigations. "Dig into Sophia Moretti," Alexander ordered. "I want everything where she studied, who she's dated, her family, any skeletons in her closet." Jacob blinked once, understanding all too well the consequences of failing Alexander's requests. "Right away, Mr. Hawthorne." Days later, a thick folder arrived at Alexander's penthouse. Within it were details on Sophia's life, an upbringing in Rome, a mother who passed away when Sophia was a teenager, a father who was an art restorer, scandal-free academic records, and the blossoming of her fashion line with the backing of Margaret Hathaway. Interestingly, Jacob also unearthed that Sophia's maternal grandmother once worked as a seamstress in an old garment district in Brooklyn, the same neighborhood Alexander had escaped as a boy. In his study, Alexander flipped through the pages, pausing on a photograph of Sophia as a child joyfully holding a small kitten. His heart gave a small involuntary lurch at the sight of her innocence. "We're not so different, you and I," he whispered to the photo. "Just you wait and see." But the investigator's report brought to light something else. Something that stirred a menacing storm in Alexander. Sophia's father, Marco Moretti, had become a vocal critic of sweatshop labor used by certain global clothing conglomerates. Some of those critiques had landed on the doorstep of Hawthorne Luxury Holdings years ago. Though no scandal had broken out, the insinuations were enough to bruise Alexander's carefully cultivated image, which he had swiftly protected with legal threats and hush money. Sitting in the dim light of a single desk lamp, Alexander rubbed his temples. A part of him admired Sophia's father for his integrity. Another part felt threatened by what father and daughter might uncover if they dug deeper. The seeds of doubt were planted, but so was a deeper curiosity. What if by winning Sophia's trust, he could steer her away from exposing any questionable practices? And what if that trust turned into something more? Something he hadn't truly allowed himself to experience in years. Love months passed, and a series of strategic coincidences brought Alexander and Sophia together in the same circles. They shared seats at Fashion Week in Paris, sipped cappuccinos at a quaint cafe in Milan, and even crossed paths at a philanthropic luncheon hosted by the influential Miranda Brown, an ambassador for UNESCO. Each encounter seemed to soften Sophia's initial reserve toward Alexander. Their conversations grew more personal. Over a bottle of vintage Barolo, Sophia spoke of her dream to revolutionize the fashion industry with sustainable practices to blend timeless elegance with ethical sourcing. Surprisingly, Alexander offered no snide remarks or dismissive gestures. Instead, he listened, truly listened. He countered with pragmatic considerations, cautioning that the market might resist higher costs, but also suggesting possible solutions. In these rare moments, Alexander found himself enthralled not by a business ledger or stock portfolio, but by the earnest, passionate spirit before him. He liked the way her eyes lit up, the way her voice rose and fell with genuine emotion when she spoke about the craft of couture. He liked that she didn't tremble before him. For Sophia, the puzzle of Alexander Hawthorne only grew more intricate. Beneath his ruthless reputation, she detected flashes of kindness. He once arranged for a specialized children's hospital to receive a large anonymous donation that saved hundreds of lives. One evening in Rome, she caught him feeding stray cats near the Colosseum, attempting to hide his good deed from the paparazzi. Could there be a man with a soul hidden under that frosty exterior amid these fleeting glimpses of humanity? She also felt the weight of Alexander's manipulations. His controlling nature lurked in every business suggestion. His resources and intelligence network gave him a near-omniscient presence around her. As enthralling as he could be, a voice inside her warned that he had a dark side she must never ignore. Their entanglement took a turning point at a grand gala in London. Sophia wore a sleek black gown of her own design, embroidered with gold threads that shimmered under the chandelier light. Alexander, resplendent in a midnight blue tuxedo, stole glances at her from across the ballroom. Finally he approached, and without a word extended his hand in invitation to dance. Under the watchful eyes of Britain's elite, the two swayed gracefully to the gentle melodies of a string orchestra. The world seemed to blur, leaving just the two of them in that dance. For Alexander, something akin to genuine happiness flickered for the first time in years. Yet as he drew Sophia closer, a wave of possessiveness crashed through him. He wanted more than her partnership. He wanted to own her heart to ensure she would never walk away. And so under the glitter of London's grand chandeliers, a dangerous sense of attachment began to form, one that would set off a chain of events neither could foresee. It started innocuously enough. Alexander began to insist on being CC'd in on emails between Sophia and her business partners. At first, it was framed as ensuring smooth communications between their respective teams. Then came the subtle criticisms of her marketing campaign. He even replaced the creative director she'd hired with one of his long-time collaborators. Slowly but surely, Hawthorne Industries started weaving its influence into Moretti Couture, in ways Sophia hadn't explicitly agreed upon. Sophia could sense the creeping vines of Alexander's control, but the changes were always couched in language that seemed supportive. When she confronted him, Alexander's eyes hardened momentarily, but then he'd deflect with a charming smile. "I only want what's best for your company," he'd say. "Think of it as a gift from me to you." Behind closed doors, however, Alexander's insecurities festered. He would pore over the day's analytics, corporate memos, and even personal messages gleaned from insider sources. The notion that Sophia might achieve success independently, beyond his direct oversight, gnawed at him. She represented the only person who had made him feel vulnerable, and vulnerability was a luxury he refused to indulge. His personal assistant, Evelyn Carter, watched the transformation in horror. The mild fascination Alexander had once shown for Sophia was warping into an obsession. The philanthropic gestures he'd made in Sophia's honor became extravagantly public, overshadowing her own achievements. The press began to link her brand exclusively to the patronage of Alexander Hawthorne. One afternoon, Evelyn mustered the courage to address the elephant in the room. "Mr. Hawthorne." She began stepping into his office with a carefully neutral expression. "I'm concerned that your relationship with Ms. Moretti is affecting the business in unexpected ways." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Are you questioning my decisions?" Evelyn steadied herself. "I'm just saying, sir, that Ms. Moretti has her own vision. She's a talented designer, but she's also fiercely independent. You risk losing her trust and the partnership if you continue on this path." He leaned back in his leather chair, eyes cold as steel. "You think I can't handle one designer?" he sneered. "You're concerned I'll lose control, Evelyn. You forget who I am." Trembling inside, Evelyn forced a smile and left the room. She worried not just for Sophia, but for Alexander too. She had witnessed how his darkest impulses could lead to destructive consequences. If Sophia ever decided to leave him personally or professionally, Evelyn feared the lengths Alexander might go to ensure that didn't happen. In a bid to salvage her independence, Sophia flew to Rome to consult her father, Marco Moretti. She desperately needed someone who could offer her perspective without ulterior motives. Marco, now in his late 60s, still possessed a gentle but unwavering spirit. He lived in a modest apartment, walls lined with paintings he had restored over decades, each telling a silent story of beauty recovered from ruin. Over espresso and pastries, Sophia recounted the whirlwind of events, the initial allure of Alexander's support, the quiet infiltration of her business decisions, and the confusion she felt about his true intentions. Marco listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his weathered hands clasped around a chipped porcelain cup. "You must remember who you are, figlia mia," he said softly. "Your art, your conscience, these are not for sale. If you let Alexander take that from you, no amount of success will ever fill the void." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. She understood her father's words, yet she also recalled the glimpses of kindness she had seen in Alexander. "I believe there's good in him," she whispered. Marco sighed, setting his cup down. Perhaps he conceded. But a man shaped by the pursuit of power, someone who has never known true vulnerability, can be dangerous to himself and to those he claims to care about. Hearing her father speak of vulnerability made Sophia realize how seldom Alexander spoke of his own past. She wanted to know what shaped him into the man he was today. In that moment, she decided to confront Alexander about the controlling measures that were slowly strangling her business. She would demand they find a more balanced partnership or sever ties entirely. Before she left, Marco placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Be careful," he warned. Men like Alexander Hawthorne do not respond well to no. Sophia swallowed hard, recalling how the press once nicknamed him the inevitable billionaire. She could only hope that her refusal to become his marionette wouldn't spark his wrath. Returning to New York, Sophia discovered an unsettling development. The contract negotiations for Moretti Couture's expansion into Asia had already been finalized by Hawthorne's legal team without her knowledge. The terms heavily favored Hawthorne Industries, tying her brand's intellectual property to Alexander's corporate empire. Furious, she stormed into Alexander's office. He was on a call but dismissed it the moment he saw her. Her face was pale, fists, clenched eyes burning with indignation. "You had no right!" she hissed, slamming the contract onto his desk. Alexander looked at her with a measured calm that belied the tension in the room. "I was expediting matters," he replied. "Time is money, Sophia." She leaned forward, voice trembling with rage. "Don't you dare treat my life's work like one of your disposable acquisitions. This has to stop." A glimmer of something akin to hurt flashed across Alexander's face. He stood, stepping around his desk to approach her. "We're partners, Sophia. I'm only trying to help you succeed. Why won't you let me help you?" She shot back. "Help or control?" In that moment, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, as though she had pierced a very fragile part of him. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but words failed him. For the first time, Alexander was confronted with the possibility that his iron grip might shatter the very person he wanted most to keep by his side. After the confrontation, Alexander sank into a deep introspective gloom. He avoided public appearances for weeks, directing business from his penthouse. Word began to circulate that Alexander Hawthorne was either planning a massive corporate move or nursing a hidden wound. In truth, it was the latter. He realized that his attempts to secure Sophia had only driven her away. She was no longer responding to his messages. Business associates whispered that she was re-evaluating the partnership, possibly seeking legal means to extricate Moretti Couture from Hawthorne Industries. That prospect stung Alexander more than any corporate betrayal he'd faced before. Late one evening, Evelyn Carter approached him in his personal study. She found him staring out the window at the city lights, a glass of whiskey on the table behind him, untouched. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said softly, "if you want to make things right with her, maybe it's time to be honest about why you act the way you do." Alexander snorted a humorless sound. Honesty. A quaint notion. And how do I explain the parts of me that even I find difficult to face? His assistant met his gaze in the reflection on the glass. "Start with the truth," she urged. "Let her decide if she can accept it." As the night draped over the city, Alexander penned a short message to Sophia, asking if she would meet him somewhere neutral, a place where neither of them held sway. Surprisingly, she agreed. They met in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Manhattan, near the waters of the East River. The cafe was modest, with simple wooden tables and soft canes playing in the background. Sophia wore a casual sweater and jeans, her face devoid of the glamour of makeup. Alexander arrived in a dark suit, but without his usual entourage. For a while they sat in silence, letting the hum of the overhead lights and the muted clatter of distant dishes fill the space. Finally, Alexander took a deep breath. "I grew up with nothing," he began, voice subdued. "My mother and I survived on scraps. She was working 3 jobs at one point. And still, I lost her. She got sick, but we didn't have the resources for proper treatment. So she died." Sophia's heart softened. She placed her hand on his. but he flinched away as though ashamed of his own vulnerability. After she died, I promised myself that I would never be powerless again. He continued, his voice trembling ever so slightly. I built my empire to ensure I'd never have to rely on anyone else. The more success I gained, the less I had to fear. Or so I thought. But then I met you and it felt different. I didn't know how to deal with it, so I tried to buy it, control it, mold it, like I do with everything else. He lifted his eyes to meet Sophia's gaze. But the truth is, I'm terrified of losing you. You're not a commodity to me. I just don't know any other way. Tears glistened in Sophia's eyes. She was moved by his confession, but the memory of his actions lingered. I'm sorry for your loss, Alexander, she said, voice gentle. But you can't fix the past by controlling everyone in your present. If you truly care for me, you have to let me be free. Let me make my own choices, take my own risks. That's love. He wanted to object, to question the wisdom of freedom in a cutthroat world, but he simply bowed his head. This was a lesson he had never learned, that love and possession were opposites. Even so, the tension between them remained. Still, for that single evening, a fragile truce was formed, sealed by an honest confession and a shared hope for something better. Over the next few weeks, a subtle shift began to take shape in their dynamic. Alexander made a genuine effort to step back from his micromanagement of Moretti Couture. He rescinded the more aggressive clauses in their business contracts, giving Sophia the autonomy she deserved. In public, he no longer boasted about the expansions and deals as if they were solely his doing. Instead, he praised Sophia's creativity and leadership. As the autumn leaves transformed Central Park into a tapestry of gold and crimson, Alexander invited Sophia for a walk among the rustling foliage. It was a far cry from his usual preference for private jets and penthouse dinners. He wanted to show her he could adapt, that he was capable of simple gestures. They strolled side by side, the crisp air tinged with the scent of damp earth and roasted chestnuts from nearby vendors. At one point, Sophia looked at Alexander and saw not the cold titan of industry, but a man grappling with his fears, trying to be someone better for her. They held hands tentatively at first, but with growing warmth. That evening, over hot chocolate in a small cafe near the park, Sophia shared stories of her childhood in Rome, how she used to watch her father restore frescoes and dream of creating her own masterpieces in fabric. Alexander, in turn, shared more about his mother's life, painting a portrait of a strong woman whose resilience inspired him, yet whose struggles haunted him. For a moment, they felt like two ordinary people forging an extraordinary bond. But outside the windows, the city bustled, and somewhere in that concrete jungle lurked the unstoppable momentum of business. The question lingering in both their minds: could this fragile reconciliation survive the weight of Alexander's empire and the shadows that came with it? While Alexander worked to loosen his grip on Sophia's business forces outside their fragile bubble were shifting. Margaret Hathaway, the heiress who had initially invested in Moretti Couture, heard unsettling rumors that Sophia was capitulating to Hawthorne Industries' demands, possibly compromising her ethical standards in the process. Worried that Moretti Couture might lose its identity under Hawthorne's control, Margaret pressed for a meeting with Sophia. In a stark conference room overlooking the Hudson River, she warned, "If you continue down this path with Alexander, we risk everything we've built. The brand's reputation depends on ethical practices and independence. Don't let a billionaire with a checkbook rewrite your principles." Sophia listened, heart torn. She explained that Alexander was changing, that he was beginning to respect her autonomy. But Margaret wasn't convinced. "He's not changing," she insisted. "Men like him don't change overnight. Watch your back." Unbeknownst to them, Alexander had been monitoring the developments. His network of informants, though he'd scaled back, still fed him intel. When he learned of Margaret's doubts, old habits of paranoia and control crept in. He feared that if Margaret convinced Sophia to break away, the fragile bond he was building with Sophia would shatter forever. In a fit of impulsive desperation, Alexander organized a private meeting with Margaret, hoping to reassure her of his good intentions. Yet despite his best attempts at diplomacy, his frustrations got the better of him. Margaret held her ground, firing back with accusations of unethical practices in Hawthorne's supply chains. Accusations that, to Alexander's guilt and fury, were not entirely unfounded. The meeting ended on a sour note, with Margaret storming out and Alexander fuming. He realized that no matter how much he tried to keep his dark business secrets under wraps, there would always be someone like Margaret Hathaway to challenge him to see the cracks in his empire. And he dreaded the day Sophia might see those same cracks and walk away. That night, Alexander sat in his penthouse blind rage, giving way to a deep sadness. He thought about calling Sophia, but what would he say? Would he ask her to cut ties with Margaret? Would he manipulate her again? The very thought made him feel sick with guilt. Instead, he stared at the city skyline, whiskey glass in hand, contemplating a life where he might actually learn to let go of the reins, if not for himself, then for Sophia. Like a predator sensing vulnerability. Some of Alexander's corporate rivals began circling. The whispers of his softening stance, especially concerning Moretti Couture, led many to believe he was losing his edge. A shadowy consortium of investors led by a cunning entrepreneur named Victor Langdon seized the opportunity to make a move on Hawthorne Industries. Victor had a personal vendetta against Alexander, dating back to a deal gone sour years ago. Determined to exploit any sign of weakness, Victor spread rumors in the financial sector that Alexander was distracted and funneling resources into a risky fashion venture, all because of a romantic entanglement. The stock price of Hawthorne Industries began to waver. Board members grew jittery. By the time Alexander caught wind of the sabotage, it was nearly too late. Several major stakeholders threatened to withdraw unless he solidified Hawthorne Industries' bottom line. As if orchestrated by fate, Sophia's brand was thrust into the crossfire, with critics questioning the viability of continuing a partnership with an unproven boutique. Sophia felt the impact acutely. Luxury retail partners began hesitating, uncertain whether Moretti Couture was tethered to a sinking ship. Margaret Hathaway considered pulling her investment out of caution. Overnight, the synergy that had once seemed like a golden opportunity turned into a swirling maelstrom of doubts, desperate to salvage both his empire and his relationship. Alexander launched a last-ditch effort to reassure his board and quell the rising panic. He orchestrated a high-profile business conference, inviting global press to witness the unveiling of a new line of eco-friendly apparel, co-branded by Hawthorne Industries and Moretti Couture. The event was designed to prove that Alexander still had his formidable business acumen, and to highlight the innovative partnership that he believed would usher in a sustainable future in fashion. Behind the scenes, the entire ordeal weighed heavily on him. Nights were sleepless, haunted by nightmares of losing everything: his company, his status, and most of all, Sophia. He busied himself with tasks, sometimes barking orders at Evelyn Carter in frustration, other times burying himself in financial reports. Sophia, too, wrestled with her own doubts. She recognized Alexander's struggle, but she wasn't sure if she could endure the chaos swirling around him. The day before the conference, she approached him in his office. He looked up, eyes ringed with exhaustion, as she asked quietly, "Are you sure about this event? About co-branding?" He exhaled, forcing a weary smile. "It's risky, but if it succeeds, we silence the critics. We prove our partnership is more than just talk, and that I'm still me." Sophia's heart twinged. His words carried more layers than business strategy. They spoke of a man fighting to maintain the identity he'd built, even as part of him tried to change. With a determined nod, she resolved to stand by his side at the conference. Perhaps this was their chance to prove they could face the world together, or discover that they couldn't. The grand conference took place at the Plaza Hotel, its ornate ballroom transformed into a sleek, modern venue for the unveiling of the new eco-friendly apparel line. Designers, CEOs, journalists and influencers from around the globe flocked to the event. Curiosity piqued by the buzz surrounding Hawthorne Industries and Moretti Couture's collaboration. Beneath the dazzling chandeliers, Alexander took the stage alongside Sophia. Dressed in a charcoal suit, he exuded an aura of unshakable confidence. Sophia, in a shimmering emerald gown, epitomized the brand's blend of elegance and sustainability. Cameras flashed, capturing the unity between the powerhouse Billionaire and the rising fashion entrepreneur. Alexander began with a rousing speech about responsibility, how the future of business lay in ethical, transparent practices. He spoke of second chances, both for industries to correct their footprints on the environment and for individuals to find better paths. Sophia followed, articulating her vision for more humane working conditions and the preservation of artisanal crafts. The applause was thunderous, the mood electric. In the midst of this triumphant atmosphere, Victor Langdon and a group of hostile shareholders struck. They announced a surprise press conference just outside the ballroom, revealing leaked documents purportedly showing that Hawthorne Industries had in some divisions relied on exploitative labor. The hush that fell in the hallway outside was deafening as reporters scrambled to verify the authenticity of the files. Inside, Alexander's phone buzzed incessantly. When he stepped off stage, Evelyn pulled him aside, her face pale. "It's bad," she whispered. "They've got internal memos, emails. They're going public with everything right now." Sophia overheard her heart pounding. She looked at Alexander, horrified. "Are these accusations true?" He swallowed hard. "Some are from old deals arrangements made without my direct oversight. But yes, they date back to times when I turned a blind eye. It's complicated." Before he could explain further, a surge of reporters rushed in, microphones brandished like weapons. They bombarded Alexander with questions demanding accountability. The once celebratory room erupted in chaos. Sophia stood frozen, reeling from the revelation that Alexander's empire was possibly built, at least in part, on the very exploitation she and her father had always fought against. Across the ballroom, Victor Langdon smirked, savoring the spectacle. Board members began publicly distancing themselves from Alexander. Carefully crafted statements, swirling about internal investigations and commitment to ethical standards. Alexander, cornered, tried to maintain composure. However, as the press hammered him with questions, the man known for his unflappable persona found himself at a loss for words. Sophia watched, torn between empathy and the realization that no matter his claims of personal growth, the fallout from his past might be too large a burden to share. Within hours, the news went viral. Major outlets ran headlines like "Hawthorne Industries under fire," "Billionaire's empire tied to exploitative labor and eco-friendly line." tainted by ethical scandal. Stock prices for Hawthorne Industries plummeted, hitting record lows. Lawsuits loomed on the horizon as activists and watchdog groups seized the moment to demand justice. Alexander retreated into damage control mode. His legal team scrambled to refute the claims, or where they were undeniably true, to propose immediate reforms. But the media frenzy was relentless, fueled by Victor Langdon's well-timed release of damning evidence. Amid the chaos, Sophia found herself besieged by calls from reporters, investors, and even her father. Margaret Hathaway temporarily withdrew her financial support until the crisis was resolved, not wanting Moretti Couture's brand to be irreversibly associated with the scandal. One late evening, after a marathon of meetings and press briefings, Alexander walked into his penthouse, tie askew, hair disheveled. Sophia was waiting, her face etched with worry and sorrow. "We need to talk," she said softly. He nodded, slumping onto the couch. For a moment, he looked not like the towering figure of intimidation, but a weary man facing the collapse of everything he'd built. "How bad is it?" Sophia asked, taking a seat across from him. "Bad," he admitted, rubbing his face. "But maybe not fatal. My lawyers think we can settle most of the pending lawsuits, but the damage to my reputation, that might be permanent." Sophia's voice trembled. "What about Moretti Couture?" "My reputation. People already think I turned a blind eye." He met her gaze, guilt flashing across his features. "I never wanted to drag you down. I swear I was trying to change things from the inside to shift our practices." She held up a hand, eyes glistening. "But you knew. You've known for years that some of your companies were exploiting people, haven't you?" A painful silence filled the room. Alexander inhaled, steadying himself. "I didn't know every detail, but yes, I suspected. I tried to tell myself it was just how business worked, that if I didn't do it, someone else would. It's not an excuse, but it was the mindset I had." Sophia blinked back tears. In that moment, she understood the profound gulf between them. He might care for her, maybe even love her, but he had built his empire on principles antithetical to her own. "I can't be part of this, not unless you're willing to uproot all those unethical practices, no matter the cost." "Can you do that?" Alexander swallowed, feeling the enormity of her request. It wasn't just about money or legalities. It was about shattering the very foundation upon which his empire stood. Part of him wanted to vow he would do anything, but the rational side of him knew that dismantling these practices meant losing entire divisions, billions of dollars, and possibly the loyalty of many board members. "I don't know," he said at last, his voice raw. Sophia nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "That might be the first truly honest thing you've said, but until you figure it out, I can't stay." He reached out, desperation shining in his eyes. "Sophia, please." She stepped back, pain etched into every line of her face. "Don't make this harder than it is. I believe there's good in you, but only you can choose whether to feed it or bury it." With that, she turned and walked out of his penthouse, leaving Alexander alone with the echo of her departure and the realization that for the first time in his life, he was facing a resounding no. In the weeks that followed, Alexander struggled with the weight of his empire's sins. He found himself at a crossroads. He could carry on as usual, using his formidable legal team and PR machinery to minimize the fallout. Or he could undertake a complete overhaul, risking financial ruin, to align his business practices with a moral compass he'd only recently discovered. The board of Hawthorne Industries pressured him to do the former. They insisted that layoffs and departmental closures combined with strategic PR campaigns would placate public outcry. They reminded him that shareholders had no patience for radical reforms that would slash profits. Yet as Alexander sat through endless board meetings, he couldn't erase the memory of Sophia's tearful eyes from his mind. He recalled the vow he'd made as a young boy, holding his mother's hand on her deathbed. "I will become so powerful that no one will ever harm us again." In chasing that vow, he had become the very thing he despised, a man who inflicted harm, however indirectly, on the vulnerable. One night in his silent penthouse, Alexander received a call from an unexpected number. It was an old friend from Harvard Business School, Charles Winthrop, who had become a well-known philanthropist working with the United Nations. Charles had followed the scandal and had a proposition for Alexander. "There's a way to fix this, but it's going to take more courage than any boardroom deal you've ever made." The idea was audacious, a top-down transformation of Hawthorne Industries from severing ties with exploitative suppliers to reinvesting in fair trade partnerships. It would mean short-term financial pain, but could set the company on a path to genuine sustainability. If implemented genuinely, it might restore public trust, and perhaps more importantly, it could help Alexander become the man he now wanted to be. For the first time, Alexander felt a flicker of hope. He scheduled a private meeting with Charles away from the prying eyes of the media. There, the two men mapped out a blueprint for a new Hawthorne Industries one that would require sacrificing billions of dollars in revenue streams, implementing profit caps for certain divisions, and forging partnerships with ethical suppliers recommended by organizations like the Fair Labor Association. Still, the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty. Alexander knew the board would fight him tooth and nail. Lawsuits were mounting and his public image was in tatters. But in the darkest hour of the night, he found solace in a single, unwavering thought. If there was even a chance to reclaim Sophia's faith in him, not as a conqueror, but as a partner, he had to try. In a tense, high-stakes board meeting, Alexander laid out his plan. The large, polished mahogany table was surrounded by grim-faced executives, each flipping through the proposal with growing alarm. Among them were old allies, new enemies, and a few undecided watchers. One by one, the board members voiced their objections. They labeled his plan suicidal, claiming it would bankrupt entire sectors of Hawthorne Industries. They brought up the possibility of losing major contracts and facing waves of layoffs as margins shrank. Alexander stood at the head of the table, arms crossed over his chest face, a mask of determination. He responded calmly to each objection. "Yes, profits will dip, but we'll rebuild with integrity. If we continue to hide from this storm, we lose everything in the long run." Victor Langdon was conspicuously absent from the meeting, having sold his shares at a profit amid the chaos, and vanished. But many of the board members who had aligned with him still opposed Alexander's radical approach. They threatened a vote of no confidence, a move that would effectively strip him of his CEO role. At this critical juncture, Alexander revealed his trump card. He had personally bought back a sizable block of shares at his own financial peril using private assets to secure majority voting rights. With this controlling stake, he had the power to override any board decision. Stunned silence filled the room as the board realized the magnitude of his move. By staking so much of his personal wealth, Alexander had effectively tied his own fate to that of the company. If Hawthorne Industries collapsed under the weight of these reforms, he'd lose everything. With a steady voice, Alexander delivered the final blow to their opposition. "I built this empire. Now I'm rebuilding it. If you stand in my way, you can walk away with whatever shares you have left. But I'm forging a new path for Hawthorne Industries, one we can be proud of. Gradually, grudgingly, a few board members began to capitulate, recognizing that their seats and their fortunes would be worthless without Alexander's leadership. Others left in protest, but not without dire warnings of an uncertain future. Alexander walked out of the boardroom, emotionally exhausted, yet resolute. A new era for Hawthorne Industries had begun, but it came with no guarantee of success or redemption. The overhaul was swift and merciless. Alexander called for immediate terminations of contracts with suppliers flagged for unethical practices. He reached out to philanthropic organizations and ethical trade groups to form new, transparent alliances. Entire divisions of Hawthorne Industries were shut down, causing waves of layoffs, an irony not lost on Alexander, who mourned the jobs lost while attempting to protect an even larger swath of underprivileged workers worldwide. The media storm raged on. Some praised him for taking accountability, while others accused him of orchestrating a massive PR stunt to salvage his tarnished image. During a press conference, Alexander addressed the controversy head-on, admitting that past practices had been indefensible and that he was committing Hawthorne Industries to a course correction. Stock prices seesawed. Analysts on financial networks debated whether Hawthorne Industries was doomed or destined to become the next socially responsible titan of industry. Meanwhile, Alexander worked around the clock, forging new deals, reassuring anxious employees, and slowly rebuilding the public's trust. Throughout it all, one thought persisted. What would Sophia think of these changes? He had not spoken to her since that tearful night in his penthouse. She had retreated to Rome, focusing on rebuilding her brand's independence. But even from afar, she witnessed the transformation unfolding at Hawthorne Industries. She saw the headlines about plant closures, new partnerships with fair trade cooperatives, and billions in write-offs to atone for historical wrongs. Her heart stirred with guarded hope, wondering if Alexander's efforts were genuine or just another layer of manipulation. Then one morning her phone buzzed. The caller ID displayed a familiar name, Evelyn Carter. Miss Moretti. Evelyn began. Mr. Hawthorne wants you to know that he's at the old garment district in Brooklyn. He's overseeing the renovation of a factory into a fair trade facility. He said, if you want to see for yourself, you're welcome to visit. Sophia's mind whirled. This was the place where Alexander had spent part of his childhood, where her grandmother had once worked as a seamstress. Perhaps it was a place of significance for both of them. After a few moments of contemplation, she decided to book a flight back to New York. Stepping onto the Brooklyn sidewalk felt surreal for Sophia. The neighborhood was a tapestry of old brick buildings, graffiti-stained walls, and new gentrified lofts. The sky was overcast, reflecting her mix of excitement and apprehension. Following Evelyn's directions, she arrived at a renovated factory. The exterior was freshly painted in a warm cream hue, with large windows revealing bustling activity inside. Workers carried bolts of fabric, while safety inspectors double-checked equipment. Outside, a modest sign read, Hawthorne Industries Fair Trade Initiative. She found Alexander standing alone near a row of sewing machines, still wrapped in plastic. He was dressed more simply than she'd ever seen him, in a black t-shirt and jeans. Gone was the usual armor of a tailored suit. Despite the simplicity of his attire, he still carried that unmistakable aura of authority. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. The wind stirred dust motes in the streaming sunlight. Finally, Alexander cleared his throat, his voice subdued. "Thank you for coming." Sophia approached, taking in the flurry of workers around them. "It looks like you've made a lot of changes," she said. He nodded, glancing at the rows of machines. We're partnering with a cooperative from Southeast Asia, guaranteeing a living wage for their workers. The final assembly will happen here in Brooklyn, where I started, where everything started. She studied his face, noticing the weariness and a hint of peace she'd never seen before. I never thought I'd see you doing something like this. He allowed himself a small, wry smile. Neither did I. But sometimes losing what you care about most is the only catalyst strong enough to make you change. Silence enveloped them. Beyond the open door, trucks rumbled by, honking occasionally. Inside, the hum of activity continued as workers installed new equipment. Alexander reached out gently, brushing his fingers against Sophia's hand. I can't undo the past, he said softly, but I can keep fighting for a better future. Part of me hopes, he paused, swallowing hard, that we could build that future together. Sophia felt tears well in her eyes. The sincerity in his voice was disarming. Still, she remembered the pain she'd felt the betrayal. I'm here, she whispered, because you've shown me there's more to you than I thought. But if I stand by your side now, it has to be an equal partnership. No more secrets, no more manipulation. Can you promise me that? He exhaled a tremor in his breath. I can promise to try. Every day. I don't have all the answers, but I know that nothing is worth more than being true to the people you love and to yourself. In that moment, they stood at the threshold of the factory. Two souls who had been shaped by different struggles, united by a hesitant hope that redemption was possible. Despite the heart-warming reunion at the Brooklyn factory challenges, still loomed large. Hawthorne Industries faced lawsuits across multiple jurisdictions. Many of the board members who had resigned were now testifying in legal proceedings, accusing Alexander of mismanagement or fraudulent practices. Meanwhile, activist groups demanded that the new factory's labor reforms be matched across all Hawthorne facilities worldwide. Sophia decided to maintain her independence while supporting Alexander's initiative from the sidelines. She continued to grow Moretti Couture, emphasizing transparency in her supply chain. She also urged Alexander to collaborate more with organizations like the Clean Clothes Campaign and the Fair Wear Foundation to ensure that his changes weren't surface level. The road to redemption proved difficult. Financial losses mounted as Hawthorne Industries reconfigured its operations, cutting ties with entire networks of dubious suppliers. Shareholders who remained loyal to Alexander grew restless, questioning his long-term vision. But Alexander pressed on, determined to see his metamorphosis through. He spent countless hours traveling to factories around the globe, personally inspecting conditions and negotiating fair contracts. For the first time in his life, he wasn't driven by a lust for power or profit. He was driven by the need to right his wrongs. Every now and then, he and Sophia would meet in various parts of the world, Paris, Milan, Tokyo, where business overlapped with fashion events. Their relationship took on a new dynamic. It was no longer a collision of wills, but a partnership rooted in a shared desire to create something more meaningful. Over quiet dinners, they spoke about the future, sometimes daring to imagine a life together free from the ghosts of the past. Still beneath the hopeful conversations lay the awareness that the world was watching, waiting to see if Alexander's transformation was real or merely an act. Skeptics abounded, and every slip-up became fodder for negative headlines. Late one night, as Sophia prepared for a major runway show in Milan, she received a call from her father. "I've been reading the news," he said. Alexander's still being dragged through court cases. He might lose everything. Sophia sighed. "I know, Papa." but I believe in him. He's taken a risk that no one else in his position would. Win or lose financially, he's already changed." Her father paused. "So you love him?" A silence lingered on the line. She realized she didn't have a simple answer. "Love is complicated," she finally said. "But I care for him deeply, and I believe he cares for me in a way he's never cared for anyone else." The next day, her runway show was a resounding success, garnering praise for its elegant, ethical designs. Backstage, while journalists clamored for interviews, she caught sight of a tall figure in a charcoal suit, Alexander quietly standing in the shadows, watching her with pride and humility in his eyes. They embraced, ignoring the flashes of cameras and the whispers of onlookers. Neither knew what the future held, but in that moment they felt something rare, a fragile yet unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of adversity and redemption. It was a cold, grey morning when Alexander entered the federal courthouse in Manhattan. This was the most significant lawsuit, a class action, representing thousands of workers from multiple countries accusing Hawthorne Industries of complicit involvement in exploitative conditions. The media presence was overwhelming, with camera crews and reporters braving the chill to capture every move of the embattled billionaire. Inside the courtroom, the mood was tense. Rows of lawyers filled the bench's stacks of documents piled high. Alexander sat at the defendant's table, flanked by his legal team. Across from him, the plaintiff's representatives eyed him with a mixture of anger and grim determination. The trial extended over several days, full of testimonies from former board members, workers, and even industry experts who painted a picture of a company that had for years prioritized profit over human dignity. Alexander didn't deny these claims. Instead, his defense was a plea for acknowledgement that he was now rectifying those wrongs. On the final day, Alexander took the stand himself. His testimony was uncharacteristically vulnerable, recounting how he had grown up in poverty and built an empire to escape helplessness. He admitted that along the way, he had lost sight of compassion and ethics. He detailed the reforms implemented in recent months, the termination of exploitative contracts, and the establishment of fair trade partnerships. "I don't ask for pity," he concluded. Voice steady, but charged with emotion. "I only ask for the chance to make things right." When closing arguments were delivered, the tension was palpable. The judge announced that a verdict would be rendered the following week. Alexander left the stand, his face pale, but carrying a subtle aura of resignation and hope. Outside the courthouse, journalists bombarded him with questions. He said little, only that he respected the court's decision, whatever it might be. Through the sea of reporters, he spotted Sophia waiting by a car, her gaze full of unwavering support. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, he found a flicker of peace. A week later, the judge delivered the ruling. Hawthorne Industries was found liable for certain damages and ordered to pay substantial restitution to affected workers. Additionally, the court mandated ongoing oversight of the company's labor practices by an independent ethical review board. To many, this might have seemed like a devastating blow. But Alexander walked out of the courtroom feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Yes, the financial cost was immense. Yes, the oversight would tie his hands in some respects. But he was free from the worst burden of all denial of wrongdoing. He had faced his sins, and while the consequences were severe, the path to redemption lay open before him. Sophia, standing on the courthouse steps, felt tears of relief slip down her cheeks. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Alexander. The press captured the moment, broadcasting it to the world, the once cruel billionaire held by the woman who had inspired his transformation. Over the following weeks, The stock market responded with cautious optimism. Shares of Hawthorne Industries stabilized as investors saw genuine commitment to ethical reforms. Public sentiment began to shift, congratulating Alexander for accepting responsibility and taking concrete steps. Meanwhile, the restitution funds administered by a third party provided immediate aid to thousands of exploited workers, helping them rebuild their lives. The final step was not a grand press conference, but a personal journey. Alexander returned to the old apartment building in Brooklyn where he'd grown up. The landlord let him enter his childhood home, now vacant and due for renovations. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, streaming through cracked windows. He stood in the small living room, memories flooding back of his mother's weary smile, the nights he went to bed hungry, and the vow he had made to never be powerless again. This time he understood that true power wasn't about domination. It was about the freedom to act justly and compassionately, unshackled by fear. He left the apartment feeling lighter, ready to embrace the unknown future with humility and gratitude. On a crisp winter morning, Alexander invited Sophia to his penthouse. The space felt different now, less like a fortress and more like a home. Green plants lined the windows, and personal photographs of smiling children from newly funded community centers adorned the walls. They shared a quiet breakfast, discussing upcoming fashion shows and Hawthorne's new ethical audit committees. As the conversation lulled, Alexander took a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a simple yet elegant ring, Sophia Moretti. He said, his voice trembling slightly. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. She had known this moment might come, but the reality struck her like lightning. She saw the genuine love in Alexander's gaze, the vulnerability he had fought so hard to conceal all his life. But she also felt the heaviness of his request. Marriage was not a business deal or a negotiation, it was the deepest bond of trust. With a trembling sigh, she looked at him and spoke the words Alexander Hawthorne had never expected to hear, the one answer he had always dreaded. She whispered. A hush fell over the room. Outside, horns honked in the bustling city. Inside Alexander's heart seemed to crack. Sophia gently took his hand. "Alexander, I love you in a way I never thought possible. But we need more time," she explained. "We've both undergone a profound transformation, and I'm proud of the man you've become. But marriage, for me, is a lifelong vow. We need to see how we navigate these new waters. Let's focus on building our relationship on equal footing day by day, without rushing into something we're not fully ready to face." Alexander felt tears burn his eyes. For once, he wasn't angry or resentful about not getting what he wanted. Instead, he was humbled by her honesty. He nodded, swallowing back the lump in his throat. She squeezed his hand. "Someday, if we continue growing together, my answer might change. But right now, I have to say no." Alexander closed the ring box, exhaling a shaky breath. "I understand," he said softly. "I respect your decision." In that moment, he discovered that losing her immediate yes didn't mean losing her entirely. The love they shared remained resilient in its honesty. And for once, Alexander was at peace with the answer he never wanted, because it was the truth, and it was enough. Life continued a tapestry of challenges and triumphs. Hawthorne Industries, under strict ethical oversight, embarked on a long process of rebuilding. Some profit margins might never return to their previous heights, but public trust and employee morale reached unprecedented levels. Sophia's Moretti couture thrived, celebrated for its blend of artistry and ethics. She and Alexander continued to collaborate on projects that championed fair labor and sustainability. They became something of an emblem in philanthropic circles, a testament to the possibility of turning greed into good. Every so often, reporters asked about their relationship status, prodding for hints of an engagement. Sophia would smile Alexander by her side and reply diplomatically that they were happier than ever, content to let love flourish at its own pace. In a quiet corner of Manhattan, in a new home filled with books, art, and the occasional stray cat, Alexander secretly rescued, they carved out a life that was both separate and shared. The walls weren't adorned with business accolades, but with photographs of their travels, philanthropic missions, and the communities they helped empower. The city buzzed outside, ruthless, ambitious, always hungry. Within the cocoon of their world, two souls had found a semblance of harmony, forged in the fires of adversity, tempered by love and anchored by the freedom that comes from choosing to be better. No longer the cruel billionaire who believed everything had a price, Alexander Hawthorne had discovered the priceless value of a single word, no, and the hope that lay beyond it. In the end, Alexander Hawthorne learned that true power is rooted in integrity, compassion, and the courage to face life without illusions. From the bitter sting of losing everything he once believed defined him, he found the courage to become someone worthy of trust and love. Sophia Moretti, for her part, stood firm in her conviction that love must be freely given, not traded for wealth or entangled in manipulations. Their journey reminds us that transformation is never easy, but can lead to a deeper, more rewarding bond. Thank you for staying with us through this tumultuous story of redemption and romance. If you found yourself moved by Alexander and Sophia's emotional odyssey, please like this video, share it with those who love intense dramas, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales. We appreciate your support and look forward to bringing you more stories that illuminate the power of change and love.